A man wakes up on a mountainside in Montana. His tent is intact. His food bag is untouched. He builds a fire, makes coffee, watches the sun climb over the ridge. Then he finds the tracks. A mountain lion had circled his tent twice. At some point during the night, while he was unconscious, alone, helpless, it had stopped, less than 6 feet from where he was sleeping. He could see where it had stood still for a long time. And then it walked away. He was never touched. This happens more than you think. Far more. Campers, hunters, soldiers in the field, people stranded in jungles and savannas, sleeping in the open, surrounded by apex predators that could have ended them in seconds. And almost always, nothing happens. For decades, wildlife biologists, survival experts, and behavioral ecologists have studied this. And the answer they found, the real answer, is stranger, darker, and more unsettling than anyone expected. Because it's not about luck. It's not about the fire or the smell of the tent or the random chance that the animal happened to be full that night. There is a reason, a specific, deeply wired biological reason, and once you understand it, you will never look at the act of falling asleep the same way again. What you're about to hear cuts through decades of wilderness survival mythology and gets to something that behavioral science has been quietly uncovering for years. The kind of content mainstream nature documentaries never quite get to. If that's why you're here, subscribe now, because this one goes places you don't expect. To understand why predators don't attack sleeping humans, you first have to understand something most people get completely wrong about predators. They are not eating machines. The image burned into us, the lion locked onto prey, the wolf hunting without hesitation, the bear smashing through anything in its path, that's the exception, not the rule. Predators, even apex predators, spend the overwhelming majority of their lives doing the one thing they absolutely cannot afford to get wrong: making decisions. A lion in the Serengeti doesn't attack every zebra it sees. It watches, it evaluates, it calculates risk against reward with a biological precision that took millions of years to develop. Because for a predator, an injury isn't an inconvenience. An injury is a death sentence, a broken leg, a torn muscle, a gash across the face. Any of those can mean the animal can no longer hunt, and if it can no longer hunt, it dies slowly. This is the foundational truth that changes everything else. Every predator encounter with every prey animal is at its core a risk calculation asterisk. Not conscious, not deliberate, but absolutely real, written into the deepest structures of the animal's brain. And sleeping humans, they break that calculation in ways that took biologists years to understand. Here's where it starts to get strange. In 1996, a research team in Zimbabwe documented something that didn't fit any of the standard predator behavior models. A group of conservation workers sleeping in an open camp, no fence, minimal fire, were observed from camera traps being approached by lions on 3 separate nights. All 3 times the lions came close, studied the sleeping humans, and left. The researchers expected proximity to trigger approach behavior. It didn't. They expected immobility to trigger the prey pursuit reflex. That didn't happen either. What they found when they began pulling apart the footage and cross-referencing it with behavioral data was a pattern that appeared again and again across different species, different continents, different ecosystems. Sleeping humans produce a specific combination of signals that most large predators have never been evolutionarily wired to attack. And the first signal is the most counterintuitive one. You would think that stillness makes you vulnerable, that lying motionless in the dark would be the most dangerous possible state. You'd be wrong. For most large predators, the attack sequence isn't triggered by stillness, it's triggered by movement, specifically the movement patterns of prey. Prey animals run, they bolt, they zigzag. They create the visual and auditory profile that wires directly into a predator's pursuit instinct. The biological switch that once flipped is almost impossible to stop mid-sequence. A sleeping human produces none of that. No frantic movement, no flight response, no prey silhouette, just a large, still shape that doesn't behave like anything the predator's instincts were built to process. This is called the asterisk behavioral novelty effect. And in the predator world, novelty doesn't trigger aggression. It triggers the one thing that predators treat as sacred: caution. But that's only the first layer. Because what researchers discovered next, the second signal that sleeping humans produce, was even more surprising. Smell. Not the absence of it, not the neutrality of it. The specific, complex chemical signature of a sleeping human body asterisk and what that signature communicates to the animals picking it up. When a human is awake and frightened, when cortisol is spiking, when the fight-or-flight system is burning hot, the human body releases a very specific cocktail of stress hormones, volatile organic compounds that drift off the skin and into the surrounding air. Predators can read those compounds like a language. Fear has a smell, prey animals in distress broadcast it, and for most apex predators that chemical signal is part of what sharpens the hunting drive. But a deeply sleeping human, the stress chemistry is almost completely absent. What remains is a baseline metabolic signature that, to most predators, doesn't read as prey at all. It reads as asterisk something unfamiliar, something large, something that isn't afraid. And across the animal kingdom, the thing that isn't afraid is almost never the thing that gets eaten. Think about that for a moment. The very act of being unconscious, of having your cortisol drop, your breathing slow, your body relax, makes you chemically less like prey, not more vulnerable, less. But there's a part of this story that almost nobody talks about. Because the behavioral novelty effect and the chemical signature together explain a lot, but they don't explain everything. There are cases, documented, verified cases, where large predators have attacked sleeping humans. And when researchers began examining those cases against the ones where nothing happened, a pattern emerged that was deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't about the predator, it was about what had been done to the predator. In the overwhelming majority of documented sleeping human attacks, the animal involved had a history of human contact. Feeding, habituation, disruption of natural territory, in some cases injury at human hands. Animals that had learned what humans were, that had previous negative encounters, or that had been fed by humans and lost their natural wariness, those were the animals that attacked. The predators that left sleeping humans alone were almost universally animals that had maintained natural distance from human populations. Animals that had never been conditioned out of their instinctive caution. Which means the conclusion that researchers quietly arrived at is one that conservation biology has been trying to communicate for decades. The danger isn't the wild predator encountering a sleeping human. The danger is the predator we've already changed. And that realization opened a much larger question. If the natural predator-prey dynamic includes this deep-wired hesitation around sleeping humans, how far back does it go? This is where the story becomes something else entirely. Because the answer isn't hundreds of years, it isn't thousands of years. Behavioral ecologists and evolutionary biologists now believe this dynamic is at least 2 million years old. When early hominids, not yet fully human, not yet controlling fire reliably, not yet building shelter, slept on the African savanna, they were doing so in an environment packed with apex predators. Lions, leopards, hyenas, saber-toothed relatives, animals that could have wiped out early human populations in a single generation if they'd hunted sleeping camps consistently. They didn't. And the working theory among evolutionary biologists is this: the predators that habitually attacked sleeping hominid groups didn't survive long enough to pass on that behavior. Early humans, even without advanced weapons, were dangerous when cornered. They had fire. They had group coordination. They had the capacity for coordinated retaliation that made repeated attacks on sleeping human groups a losing long-term strategy for any predator lineage. So over hundreds of thousands of years, predators that instinctively avoided sleeping human groups thrived, and the ones that didn't. The hesitation we see today, the mountain lion that circles the tent and walks away, isn't random caution. It's the result of a 2 million year co-evolutionary negotiation between humans and the predators that shared their world. You carry the memory of that negotiation in your DNA, so does the lion. Neither of you knows it consciously, but both of you behave accordingly. Here's where it gets complicated. Because that co-evolutionary relationship, the one that made sleeping relatively safe in the wild for most of human history, is being dismantled. Not slowly, not in geological time, in decades. As human development expands into predator territory, as animals are fed at campsites, as habitat destruction forces apex predators into closer and more stressful proximity with human populations, the natural wariness that evolved over 2 million years is eroding. Bears that associate humans with food don't maintain the same instinctive caution. Leopards pushed into smaller and smaller territories begin responding to human presence differently. The calculation shifts. And here's the part that behavioral scientists will tell you if you push them hard enough. We don't fully understand the tipping point. We don't know at a species level how much disruption it takes to flip the instinct. We're running that experiment right now, live on multiple continents. The cases of predator attacks on humans, including sleeping humans, have increased in documented frequency over the last 40 years. Not uniformly, not everywhere, but the trend line exists. And it points in one direction. There's a moral complication buried in all of this that doesn't get enough attention. The predators that evolved alongside us, that built their behavioral repertoire partly around us, are now navigating a world we've made nearly unrecognizable. They're using ancient rules to navigate a new landscape. And the ancient rules don't always work anymore. Which means the lion that circles your tent in Montana tonight isn't just calculating risk. It's running an evolutionary algorithm on a world it wasn't built for. It's working with information that's 2 million years out of date. And whether it still makes the right call is becoming less certain by the year. There is something ancient in the fact that you can fall asleep under open sky and most of the time wake up. Not because nature is gentle, not because apex predators are misunderstood and harmless, but because something deep and old and mutual, a biological treaty written not in language but in instinct and consequence, has held across millions of years of shared existence. You sleep, the predator watches, and something in both of you understands. But treaties, even biological ones, depend on the conditions that created them remaining intact. The mountain lion tracks in Montana are still circling campsite after campsite. The lions in Zimbabwe still approach and withdraw. For now, the behavior holds. But the animals that made the pact with us were shaped by a world we are rapidly erasing. And the new animals, the ones being raised at the margins of human expansion, conditioned by our food and our noise and our presence, they didn't sign anything. Sleep well tonight. The rules are still in place. For now.